Pozdravljene, pozdravljeni. Dobrodošli na današnjem dogodku v okviru Dnevov enakosti spolov Filozofske fakultete Univerze v Ljubljani. Dogodek snemamo in posnetek bo objavljen na naši spletni strani pod zavihkom enakost. Današnji dogodek je mednarodni, tako da bo v nadaljevanju jezik pogovora angleščina. Dear guests, welcome to the Days of Gender Equality, Faculty of Arts, University of Ljubljana. This event will be recorded and will be available at our webpage under the title Equality. Today's event is international, and the language after my short introduction will be English. Dovolite mi najprej, da predstavim Dneve enakosti spolov in uvedem današnji dogodek in naše gostje. Dnevi enakosti spolov so nastali v okviru uresničevanja načrta enakosti spolov, ki ga je Filozofska fakulteta sprejela maja leta 2020. Lansko leto smo v tem okviru organizirali 15 dogodkov, na katerih je sodelovalo okrog 50 govork in govorcev in okrog 500 udeleženk udeležencev. Letos se jih bo od 8. marca do 13. aprila zvrstilo 10 in že do sedaj je sodelovalo več kot 30 govork in govorcev. Na teh dogodkih predstavljamo naše delo, raziskovalne rezultate, zanimiva dela, od študentskih do profesorskih in naslavljamo aktualne probleme in vprašanja. V ta kontekst se uvršča tudi današnji pogovor o spolni zaznamovanosti vojne v Ukrajini. Naj takoj na začetku povem, da smo se za organizacijo tega dogodka odločili zato, da damo glas ukrajinskim sociologinjam, ki se ukvarjajo s položajem žensk v družbi in enakostjo spolov. V zadnjem času o ženskah v Ukrajini namreč slišimo večinoma ali celo samo kot o tistih, ki rešujejo svoje otroke in starejše člane družine, bežijo iz napadene domovine v varna območja, tam pa strahom trepetajo za življenje svojih sinov, mož in očetov, skratka kot o žrtvah. A ženske v Ukrajini so angažirane še marsikje drugje in drugače. Prav o tem, kje, kaj in kako bi bilo pravičneje spregovoriti o ženskah v Ukrajini danes, nam bodo z izsledki svojih raziskovanj in lastnih izkušenj predstavile naše sogovornice, predavateljice in raziskovalke iz Ukrajine. Pripravljeno sodelovati na našem dogodku kljub težki situaciji, v kateri se nahajajo tako naše gostje same, kot njihovi najbližji, se jim že na samem začetku iskreno zahvaljujem. Spregovorile bodo o vpletenosti žensk v vojni v Ukrajini, proti Ukrajini, ženskem, aktivizmu, njihovem sodelovanju v oboroženih silah. Iz sociološke in feministične perspektive bodo ponudile prve refleksije o tem, kako so izkušnje vojne spolno zaznamovane, o vplivu vojne na enakost oziroma neenakost spolov. Pozornost bodo posvetile tudi temu, kako nekatere ukrajinske politike povezane z vojno oblikujejo in spreminjajo življenje ukrajinskih moških in žensk. Naše sogovornice bodo doktorica Tamara Martsenyuk, izredna profesorica na Oddelku za sociologijo Akademije Univerze Kijev-Mohila, Ukrajina, doktorica Svetlana Bobenko, izredna profesorica na Oddelku za družbene strukture in družbene odnose in študije spolov Univerze v Lundu, Dafna Račo, ki je doktorska kandidatka na področju sociokulturne antropologije na Univerzi Indiana Bloomington. Pogovor bo moderirala doktorica Maryna Shevtsova, ki je postdoktorska sodelavka utopije na Oddelku za sociologijo Filozofske fakultete Univerze v Ljubljani in višja sodelavka na Katoliški univerzi v Belgiji. Dear guests, dear speakers, let me now greet you in the framework of Days of Gender Equality of Faculty of Arts. Let me say at the very beginning that we decided to organize this event in order to give a voice to Ukrainian sociologists who research and teach about the position of women in society and gender equality. Recently, we heard about women in Ukraine mostly or even only as those rescuing their children and elderly family members, fleeing their homeland to safe areas, and they're trembling with fear for the lives of their sons, husbands, and fathers, in short, as about victims. But women in Ukraine are engaged in many other ways. Our colleagues, lecturers, and researchers from Ukraine will present the results of their research and their own experiences on where, what, and how it would be fairer to talk about women in Ukraine today. Special thanks go to Maryna Shevtsova, who helped us organizing this event and brought all of you to us today. But before I give her the floor to moderate the discussion, I would like to ask all the discussants to tell us first where you are now, why you are where you are, and how do you see your personal situation at the moment. We are namely very shocked and appalled when watching scary footages from the war zones in the last few days, especially from Bucha. And that is why I think it would be wrong to completely ignore these circumstances. I would start asking to say a few words with Svetlana Bobenko, then Daphna, Tamara, and at the end, Maryna. Please take the floor.
Okay, thank you for giving the floor and invitation to this important event. And I think it's really personal, and every experience of the war is personal experience. And I am head of MA program in gender studies in Taras Shevchenko National University of Kiev, which is the only one in Ukraine that gives diplomas in gender studies. And it was really a miracle event that I had a small project between Lund University and Tbilisi University, as they also have MA program in gender studies. We planned 3 meetings, one in Lund, one in Tbilisi, and the third one in Kiev. And the first meeting was planned from 3rd to 8th of March. And I have tickets and this pre-planned workshop here. And of course, tickets didn't work, and it was just a destination where I know where I go. And when Kiev was started bombed in 24/01/2022, I was several days in Kiev, and then when I heard that Russian army occupied Chernobyl, it was for me a sign to start leaving Kiev. And I left via Lviv, Przemysl, Krakow, and then my colleagues in Lund bought me a ticket from Krakow to Copenhagen, Lund. And miracle was that I arrived exactly on 3rd of March, that was pre-planned, and take a part in the events that were pre-planned 2 months ago. So it was really surrealistic, all this experience. And I would like to say that the most important thing I have from this very long and really hard way, it was 15 hours in train from Kiev to Lviv and 30 hours train from Lviv to Przemysl. All of important thing that I have, it's networking and help and support of people on all the way. Support of people who are in absolutely crazy situation when there are 350 people in the train, in the wagon, which is planned for 50 people. So people stay 30 hours with their children, with their cats, with their dogs. And you see very well when some of them exchange their places, some to stay and to sit and take someone's children on their hands. And there are someone who stay like this and say, I will not stand up because you will take my seat. So we see very, very well a huge cooperation and the best qualities of people as well as the other one. So I would like to say that all experiences are personalized and we have to see broader picture. The other thing is that networking, and especially we are really lucky to have a profession as sociologists and academic profession, which is a huge network of people. So when I was in this tray, I was just a message in Facebook Messenger from a person, from Anna Horolets, to whom we met maybe 20 years ago when I was a PhD student and we met just for a week in some summer school, and she dropped me a line that it's awful things, how are you, where are you, I am in Warsaw, and if you need help, please come to, you can stay in my house. And I said that I'm this in this way, and she find via her colleague, also Anna Finn in Krakow, whose parents live in Przemyśl, and these Przemyśl parents meet me in the train station, let me stay at their house overnight, then brought me by car to Krakow, and I stay a night in Anna's home, and then I have my flight to Copenhagen and Lund. So this huge cooperation of sociologists, of colleagues whom I never know or whom I meet just occasionally, really a great asset that we all have, and that I am really grateful to have as an experience of cooperation, and also women cooperation, all of that. So, okay, I will not take the floor more. So.
Thank you so much, Svetlana, for sharing this with us. We see how terrible moments and days and weeks we are behind you. Thank you so much. Daphne?
Hello, everyone, and thank you really so much for inviting me to speak here. It's really an honor to share some of what I have been thinking recently about the gendered experience of war in Ukraine. At this particular moment, I am in Kiev, in the capital of Ukraine, but for the last 2.5 weeks, together with my partner, I have been circulating through Kiev, Lviv, Kryvyi Rih, and Vinnytsia, because we have been bringing tactical supplies, we have been bringing medicine from Lviv to Kiev and Kryvyi Rih. So it's been interesting. So we have done a few interesting round trips, so to say. About how I feel energized and grateful because I was able to have a very good night's sleep without any air raid sirens, which is really incredible. And also I was able to take a shower and to brush my teeth in the morning, which is also like incredible, because the war has really changed my perspective on these everyday practices. Because also when you're constantly on the road, when you come to one place and you have to quickly unpack the car and then pack it with a lot of other things to bring to the next city, you don't really always have time for these procedures that I still enjoy, like taking a shower, brushing my teeth and stuff like that. So like, to cut a long story short, I'm in Kiev and I'm inspired.
We can even not imagine what is the life like you're spending. Thank you so much. Tamara, the floor is yours.
Hello, thanks a lot for organizing this event. When war started, I was in Kyiv and decided to stay there, but I managed to do it only 9 days. I was living in an area quite close to Bucha and Irpin, and I could hear all fights and couldn't stand these explosions anymore. And a number of my friends were messaging me constantly, you should get out of Kiev because you're not in territorial self-defense, you're a burden for the city. So but I don't have car and can't drive, so I was strategically, the only possibility was to evacuate through train. And I'm not priority among those who evacuate because I don't have children and elderly or disabled people. So I was waiting with my friends and colleagues. We were waiting until priority women will evacuate, and we took train to Volyn area and then to Poland. And actually now I ended up in Berlin. Somehow by chance, but I have some contacts because I before was on the conferences at Free University of Berlin. So now I am temporary guest a researcher at Free University of Berlin, East European Studies. Fortunately, I'm not supposed to teach here because at our university we started online teaching from this week already, and it's quite a challenge as far as we students know if all our students are in a safe place, but now I need to have the challenge of so-called nomadic scholar, because we moved with this, my friend and colleague, we are already in our fourth place in Berlin, so we're somehow constantly moving from one place to another, and I chose Berlin also as quite close location in the situation if it will be victory, that to have possibility to return to Ukraine as soon as possible. Yeah, thanks a lot for event and your attention to war in Ukraine.
Thank you so much to you too, Tamara, to sharing with us your experience. And now, Maryna, we know that you are in Ljubljana at Faculty of Arts, but anyway, explain shortly your situation as well.
Yes, thank you very much, first of all, Milica, for making this happen. And for me, of course, this is a big pleasure to have these three amazing colleagues, friends of mine at this panel tonight, even though this is a very sad occasion for that. And also to see some other colleagues here present with us. On the 24th of February, I was supposed to give a talk online at the University of Leuven about memory politics to students of my mentors there. And then in the morning, he sent me a message asking whether I will be able to do this talk still. And I said, yes, of course. Now I feel that it is even more important to talk about this to your students. And I remember that when we talked, of course, everybody was completely sure that it will be over in a week. And we had some speculations and we were discussing. So my research here at the University of Ljubljana is about right-wing groups in Ukraine and how they are opposing sexual and gender equalities. So we were discussing a little bit of that and so on, but nobody could imagine that it will last for more than 40 days already. And we clearly see that now it's not the end. But at the same time, and of course, as for everyone, even though I was safe from the very beginning, but my family is in Ukraine, my close friends are in Ukraine, their relatives are in Mariupol, and we live through this all together, like them being with no connection with their mothers and sisters. So these are for all of us ups and downs. So ups when we see how people are mobilized in solidarity here in Ljubljana, in small Slovenia, how you see so many volunteers like bringing everything they have at home to help Ukrainian refugees, but then downs when you read news in the morning and you see that your city was bombed or some other city. But what I wanted to say that particularly important, what I see in this war now, what changed in Ukrainian media and Ukrainian public discourse is now, even though, of course, there is this narrative of women being victims, mothers, wives, a priority to be saved from Ukraine, but there is much more acknowledgement of the role that women are playing in defending the country, in organizing front and home front. And I'm very happy that these great scholars we have today will be able to talk about this and to give voice to some experiences that are actually still overlooked or silenced.
Thank you, Maryna. Now I will give the floor to you to moderate the whole discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So I will just continue from where I stopped, and I will not take much space and time right now because I really want to give the floor to the speakers. But I wanted to bring up two important points, and one, as I said, the fact that it's been already 40 plus days of war. And for many of us, yesterday, I was speaking at the panel with activists in Ireland, and we were talking about the fact that clearly this is not a sprint run, this is marathon. And there was also a colleague from Poland who works at the border all the time. She was talking about what we all observe, that this first wave of adrenaline, the first wave of enthusiasm of volunteers, because so much is being on volunteers and not on states, unfortunately, not on the public institutions, but more on people's self-organization, mobilization. So this first wave is exhausting slowly, and it will be exhausted at some point. And this main danger that volunteers have is burnout, emotional, physical burnout. That is a big danger. And then we were talking, and I hope we will be able to talk about this a little bit today, of what solutions, what systemic solutions should be provided, made at the level of the state, but also, since we are mainly scholars and students, academics here, at the levels of academia, maybe at the level of the universities, what can be done by us, being affiliated with some very good educational institutions. And of course, another broader topic is what indeed, how the situation of war, how the experiences of war are gendered. And another thing that I also hope that will be discussed, and I know that my colleagues will bring it up, is that of course we talk about women's experiences at war, but when we talk about gendered experiences, it's also about certain things which are overlooked concerning male experiences, and what our main colleagues or men who do not fit in this normative masculinities, boxes and images are experiencing now in these new circumstances. And with this, without further ado, I wanted to give the floor to Tamara and just say that Tamara is a dear friend and colleague of mine, and as Milica already said, she is an associate professor at the Department of Sociology at the University of Kijev-Mohila Academy, but also very important, Tamara does a lot to make sociology a science open to everyone. She gives a lot of talks and produces a lot of product to a wider audience to popularize the idea of gender equality and women's rights in Ukraine. And I'm very happy to have you here, Tamara.
Maryna, thanks a lot. And I'll try to talk on women's involvement in this war. And I do believe that through women's involvement, it's possible to understand better Ukrainian society, why it's resist, and why actually international community is very, I would say, positively impressed how we are resisting in this war. And I will use some visual material, and it's absolutely separate topic to analyze all these pictures, self-made illustrations. This one that I put on cover, I think it demonstrates very nicely how women have this triple role of resistance, protection, and caring. And I will start with resistance, because I do believe that this war is about it, and results of public opinion survey that was conducted actually 1 month ago by InfoSapiens for the British Research Agency. It demonstrates that majority of Ukrainians, 67%, are ready to personally participate in the armed resistance to end the Russian occupation of Ukraine. Among them, men 78% and approximately 60% of women are ready to participate in armed resistance, so to use arms in this occupation, in this war. And I would like to say that for the past 10 years, we have some legacy of women's participation in Euromaidan protests and in war in Donbass that started in 2014. I have a separate scholarship and publications on gender aspects of Euromaidan protests. And just to summarize that, I would like to say that Ukrainian women managed to challenge so-called traditional gender roles as caretakers and victims of conflict, and reclaimed visibility, recognition, and respect as revolutionaries and volunteers. And I try to show this in my research and papers, and do believe that there is some connection and legacy of this procedure. Also, actually, war in Ukraine started already 8 years ago from occupation of Crimea and Donbass. And during this war, women joined the front lines as volunteers, journalists, medical staff, and military, also on combat positions. And I was as a public sociologist who was approached by military woman Maria Berlinska and asked to help military women to fight for their labor rights in military. We conducted a sociological study called Invisible Battalions. It's actually a liberal feminist study about visibility of women's participation in war, especially in so-called male combat positions. And as we did now 3 studies, and results demonstrate successes and challenges of gender equality implementation in the Ukrainian armed forces. Also, the status of female veterans that are quite visible group among 500,000 of veterans of so-called anti-terrorist operation. And also we even managed to approach the very problematic topic of sexual harassment in the military. And currently there are some court cases on this, and we discuss other problems in armed forces, bullying, suicides, etc. And actually, currently we've been doing the project on women's access to military education, but war interrupted this. Anyway, we could see that and military women, they were fighting for their rights, and it was lobbying the issue of discrimination, of protection from discrimination, and some results we could see now, because in this war we could analyze, as in any activity or any war, women's involvement as, from one hand, agents or actors of resistance, from other hand as victims. And I want to start with agents or actors. There are a lot of pictures and posters where actually women are positioned as actors. Women participate in self-territorial defense. They are part of armed forces. Women are pilots, snipers, and they are doing different combat roles. They die, for example, unfortunately, yes, for example, recently one woman died, pilot woman died, and you could see that women of different age, not only younger ones, but even older women, who may remember Second World War or stories from Second World War, they participate in different aspects. They participate as volunteers. You could see this poster where a volunteer woman from Irpin, she's helping to evacuate disabled pets. And this actually picture, it was a photo turned into poster, and it became quite famous international symbol of resistance. And women are doing a lot of different work also to help armed forces, volunteers, and they are actors of this resistance. Women who are stereotypically perceived as those who appeal to peace, they had to ask for weapons. For example, initiator of this campaign, Invisible Battalion, veteran, volunteer, and women's rights advocate Maria Berlinska. You could see on this picture where she is with American politician. She's now in Washington, and she's asking for a weapon for Ukraine, writing a number of Facebook posts and doing this and saying her positions that and explaining, yes, why it's important. And even non-military women, they write about a weapon, and they explain why in the situation where actually international legislation and international peace legislation doesn't help, actually Ukraine needs a defense system. You could see here Alexandra Matveychuk, very famous human rights defender. She is now coordinating documentation of war crimes, so-called Tribunal for Putin Coalition. Around 2 weeks ago, I was with her on one event in Canada, and she, in the end of her speech about atrocities and war crimes, she asked publicly also, when in the end we were supposed to say what we need, what we ask for. So she asked for more weapon, and I just put from her Facebook, I also put some citation where she explains that Ukraine needs military jets, for example, to be able to control the sky, that we need heavy weapon to defend children and to defend our people, because in the situation of these atrocities, it's really very difficult to resist. At the same time, I decided to put picture from the protest where I participated yesterday. It's in Berlin. As far as women are those who had the opportunity to evacuate, so they organize and participate in different protests abroad. And this is picture from our yesterday's protest, where mainly women, but also, of course, some men joined, where we laid down as a symbol of those who are already killed in different cities. And we demanded embargo to Russian gas and oil. That is still a hot issue, especially here in Germany. And very brave young women, they were leading this protest, these actions, and similar protests are all over the world, and women are very actively participate in it. Of course, from the other hand, women are those who are victims and vulnerable groups, because they are asked and they have to not to be burdened for the military to leave their cities. They suffer so they evacuate. Some of them, they never been traveling before alone with kids in Ukraine or abroad. And women are victims and potential victims of sexual trafficking. Women are victims of rape from Russian military. There are already a number of such cases, and there are a number of you see some already some information on this, and there are even some, I would say, particular. I could mention only, of course, couple of them, and but this woman was called Ukrainian Madonna. It's mother from Kiev. She protected her baby and got 24 wounds from glass because of explosion in Vinogradar, Kiev. And but her daughter, she wasn't hurt, and actually she was, you could see picture, and there are a number of already some visual art posters and stories about her. At the same time, there were other examples where, for example, where Irina Vereshchuk, Minister for Integration of the Temporary Occupied Territories, she published on her Facebook a photo with Ukrainian soldiers liberated from Russian captivity, and among them you could see 15 women. And gender scholar and historian Marta Gavryshko explains, and we now know that these women, they were tortured, and you see they are actually without hair, and she is saying that it's cruel attack on women's bodily integrity and intimacy because of the cultural meaning of hair for women. Hair is a strong conjunction with femininity, women's self-perception and dignity. And it's just only one of the example how this women, after surviving these terrible things, you see they still have the dignity to smile and to be brave and to continue fighting. And my very last slide, I would like to devote to mythology and Kyiv, and not only Kyiv is famous for so-called Ukrainian witches. And actually the mythology and this image of witchcraft, witches, valkyrias, those images are used by women, also military women. They name themselves valkyrias, and there are a number of stories, mythology already around this war. And in the situation when we constantly ask to shelter the sky and it doesn't happen, you see there are posters like "Girls, let's close the sky." I think I would stop here, and thanks for your attention, and I will be glad to answer your question. And Maryna, I just want to ask, because you said that we as scholars could also say what we see, what we could do. And so should I say it now or maybe later?
Maybe we have a special round for that then, because I think it's
quite
an important
topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tamara, and for the slides and visuals that I'm sure touched everyone as much as myself. And I remembered about the protests. I remembered also another campaign that organized our women in Poland. They actually made a live blockade. They blocked the border between Poland and Belarus, not letting the trucks coming back to Belarus with goods to enter. And they got then threats, and there were issues of abuse from the side of drivers, but they didn't let the trucks pass. So another amazing example of bravery and resistance. And I would like now to give the floor to Svetlana Babenko. And Svetlana, unfortunately, we never had a chance to meet in real life, but always virtually. And I hope there will be a chance in Kiev. And the most important thing I want to mention about Svetlana is that thanks to her, we have in Kiev now this program in gender studies. And I can only imagine how much effort it cost to organize it and to have it functioning. And I hope for more such programs in Ukraine. Please, Svetlana, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Maryna, for giving the floor. And also, when I was invited to give a talk, I was, I think, overestimated my forces. And I think as it's a gender event, it's also okay to talk about body and feelings and how it works. And I want to say that really, we, as Tamara said, really we are expected to function fully as professionals, to give presentations, to teach our students, to do all the work that we've done before, plus additional work that we are doing because of war happened. And but for me, it's also an experience of meeting myself as a person who sometimes and somehow cannot, for example, concentrate of what I am reading or what I am trying to say or writing. And I think that we have also to take into account such kind of things. And first, I would like to pay attention to really great and huge academic part of our experience of being in war and getting great support from European funds and European Union on relocation and getting opportunities and scholarships. And I am also very grateful to Lund University, that is a great supporter for opening our double degree program in gender studies, because all the time it was a huge support as having not just gender studies program in Taras Shevchenko University of Kiev, but having double degree program that we organized as for me, it was very important that we have a principle of equality here. So we have students from Lund who get our Ukrainian diploma and spend semester, and vice versa. Not only our students go to Lund. And for Lund, it was also a piece of agreement. And my gratitude is that we having, to make something that has never existed before. It took huge bureaucratic thing, and to sign the first agreement, and took about more than half a year between our universities. But to relocate now students from MA program, both first and second year students, and even get scholarship for them and accommodation in the midterm, it took only 3 weeks for Lund University, which is huge bureaucracy. So it's really great thing. And it's really great academic support that is allocated. But and from the other hand, we have all these great opportunities of scholarships that being a head of Kiev unit of Sociological Association of Ukraine, I also collect and disseminate among our colleagues and scholars. There is a big issue for getting this scholarship. You have to write an application. It is also checked as for excellence and so on and so forth. And it is this decision making is done having still the funds is relocated for Ukrainian scholars, but the way of decision making is based on situation of normal academic life, but is not considered that, for example, single mother academic person, really professor, good professor, can stay in a room with having her child, cat, elderly mother, and need to teach online her courses in local university, and also write a great application to get a scholarship and financial support for her. So it's really absolutely not considered the situation that many of academics now have. And for me, one of the decisions of what academia can do is to continue with networking and teamwork, to have in mind that we really need to support teams and groups of scholars who can work jointly on the project, for example, and have cooperation and coordination. So it's most of the scholarship are individual scholarships, but in current situation, I think that it would help to departments to keep in touch for those who left and relocate in the other countries, and who stay because of different reasons, because of gender, because they are males and cannot go, but still need to be supported and have their academic work running, for example, and also for those who are not in a really good stand after getting out of occupied territories, bombed territories, having the loss of their relatives and closest ones. So they are in really hard psychological situation. So they need to relieve first and then to continue with their academic work. So this reorganization of this kind of academic support for scholars, making that not individual but teamwork, and make the support allocated not only for those who moved to abroad and get some positions, like more lucky one like me or Tamara, who have good academic contacts and profile and previous projects and agreements and networking, but we have so many colleagues who never was involved in such kind of things, but also let them stay in academia and have a chance to survive and be back to their academic work after the war is finished. So I think this is a message that I would like to share as an experience. And one more thing which is very much important, and we write a lot about it as a voice of Sociological Association of Ukraine and scientific academia, that we really have to name and wording is matter. So it is not a conflict in Ukraine. It is not conflict situation. We have any conflict situation before the Russian invasion and before Russian war in Ukraine. It started in 2014. And if we already that time call the war as a war, if we already there not cover it like anti-terroristic operation or special operation and something like that, we could have much more chances not to have the full hand invasion already in February. And war didn't start, as we already talked, didn't start in February. It is continuation of the war that Russia starts and continuously do in Moldova, making Prидnestrovia, in Georgia, separating Abkhazia, in Nagorno-Karabakh with Armenia and Azerbaijan, in Syria and in Ukraine from 2014. So we have a country aggressor with Russia. We have really aggressive society with imperialistic last century ideology, going back to the past and trying to get back all the region. And when I had speeches saying that we have some kind of war on the here and there, but we are on the edge of the Third World War. And if we let, for example, NATO invade and close the sky in Ukraine, it will be the start of the First World War. No, we have it already, and it's already for several decades. It's already started, and Ukraine now is a shell for this. And many women and men who are already died for this and who are every day dying in saving in the name of saving Europe for this invasion. But this is already the Third World War, and it is civilization of 21st century against the imperialistic idea of 20th century. So the wording matters because when we call it with its own name, we can do and act accordingly, and not showing this maybe approach which is used in this hybrid 21st means of hybrid informational war and propaganda that Russia actively use in different means. So I think I am not very much within the frame of well, gender based thing, but I think Tamara has a really brilliant presentation focused on them. So I will stop right here and will be ready for your questions and comments. Thank you.
Svetlana, thank you so much for sharing all this. And many things you said, of course, resonate a lot with me. And I was thinking also yesterday, I was talking to a friend of mine who went to camp for refugees here in Slovenia and Lagac. with a journalist, and they were trying to make some interviews with refugees, with Ukrainian women refugees here. And the problem, well, if I can call it the problem, was that once the camera was there, once these women were interviewed, as well as Daphna today, they were very energized and smiling and were saying, everything is fine, we are doing great. And I find myself also very often, behaving in this way, because we appreciate, of course, being safe and being, having now not here far, like in Slovenia is far from Ukraine, but at the same time, I think it is very important actually to voice that no, maybe we're not okay, and just to not to all the time keep this energized image, to remind people that no, situation is not okay. It's not been okay for quite some time. Thank you very much for speaking about this. And Daphna, I'm so happy to see you on the screen alive and active. And thank you so much for finding time to talk to us today from Kiev. Please, I don't want to take any second of your time. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I have shared the presentation successfully, right? Great. So, yes, I'm really happy to be here today and to be talking to you, because as Maryna rightly mentioned, this feeling of being energized, it doesn't last all the time, it doesn't last very long. And quite often, like at the end of the day, after having accomplished like a million of different things that you didn't really know were coming your way, you feel really beat. But yeah, so I decided to start this brief talk of mine with a picture featuring Lesya Ukrainka, this woman on a billboard. And Lesya Ukrainka is a really well-known Ukrainian writer. And there is 3 billboards in this series, and they feature Taras Shevchenko, Ivan Franko, and Lesya Ukrainka. And these 3 people, they are basically the holy triad of Ukrainian literary canon. But it is really inspiring to see Lesya Ukrainka featured in these billboards, not only because she is a woman, but also because she is a feminist and important socialist thinker. So, just to give you a brief overview in this talk, I plan to briefly mention how one's gender affects your experience of war, and also, most importantly, how this experience is often tied to one's class and regional background. And just a brief paragraph about me and why I am talking to you here today. So I am a PhD student at Indiana University, Bloomington in the US, but I am originally from Ukraine. I was born in Kiev. I lived for 20 years in Kiev, and a few years ago, my parents, they moved to the north of Kiev, to the village called Horenka, which is really close to Hostomel, and half of this village, it was, well, bombed and shelled. And I returned to Ukraine in August 2021 to do my dissertation research on HIV in Ukraine. Basically, I was interested in various prevention and treatment programs that exist in the country. And I was particularly curious about the role of the state in all this, because slowly but steadily, Ukrainian state was playing a greater and greater role in monitoring and financing these programs. And secondly, I was interested in how target groups of these programs, like sex workers, for instance, how they respond, like basically what they think about all these programs. And I mean, like, the upside of ethnography is that the whole world is your field, essentially. But I mean, this war has changed quite a lot, and it may well be that I will have to refocus my research, of course, but I mean, I keep in touch with my participants, and they have become dear friends. So just to jump into my talk, I think that I'll start with a small reminder that gender is not just an identity, but it is also to remember that gender is also like something how we are categorized by other people. So essentially, it is also how other people see us, what they attribute to us, but also how different bureaucratic institutions and the state sees us essentially, and like the state is often like the nexus where a lot of these institutions and discourses about gender intersect. And it is important now because of this gap between identity and between gender identity and gender attribution. A lot of transgender people, they now find themselves in this conundrum when they cannot really leave Ukraine, because as you probably know, in the very beginning of this full-scale invasion, the president of Ukraine, he introduced the martial law. So now men who are basically aged from 18 years to 60 years, they cannot really leave the country because they are so-called this like mobilization reserve. Of course, there are a few exceptions. For instance, you can leave the country if you are a student of studying abroad, but procedure for that is not really clear. So like returning to transgender people, like juridically, if you are a transgender woman and you have all the necessary documents, you are allowed to cross the border and to leave the country. However, like in practice, very few transgender women, they have all the documents in one place, like ready to show to the border guards in order to leave country. And the practice of letting transgender people out of the country is a little bit different from what is written in the legislative document, because sometimes a decision rests kind of like with a single border control officer, well, who has discretion. And then, so just to give you like a few details, if you have a paper certifying that you were given a special psychiatric diagnosis made during a gender reassignment procedure, that's the first step. Then you have to pass a military medical examination in the Vizkomat, the so-called district military office. And then they kind of like deregister you, and they kind of like take your name of the potential enlistment list. And after that, you're allowed to go with these like 2 papers to the state office where they change your documents, and then they change your gender marker from man to woman in the passport. And technically, like after you have completed all the steps, you are allowed to leave. But guess what? Before the invasion started, not a lot of transgender people, they actually had all these documents in place, because this process is, well, it's quite difficult. And these Vizkomata, the district military officers, they were like notorious for being slow, for being very bureaucratic, for not being really LGBT friendly. So a lot of people, they didn't want to go there. They postponed the visit to this office. So unfortunately, like a minority of transgender women now, they have the necessary documents that allow them to leave the country. And now, since the full-scale invasion started, it's really difficult to obtain all the necessary documents to leave, because, well, the doctors, they are really busy treating other cases. These military district offices, they are overwhelmed with other things. And also the state institutions that were responsible for changing your documents, at least until recently, they were not operating at 100% of productivity. So unfortunately, a lot of transgender people, they are now forced basically to remain in the country. And I also wanted to briefly talk about how this war also revived some patriarchal stereotypes, and how certain gender-related policies of the Ukrainian state, how they affect your experience of this war if you're a man. And Tamara has said a lot of things about how the Ukrainian army is changing. And this is 100% true, but army still is a predominantly male institution, although thanks to people like Maria Berlinska and thanks to people like Tamara, this situation is changing. But I wanted to show you this picture. I took it myself in one of the cities in Western Ukraine, and there is a huge billboard meeting you at the railway station. And essentially, this billboard says, so if you are more than 18 and less than 60 years old, and you are a man, then leave your family here. We will take care of your family and you go back and protect your country. And I will not unpack a lot of things that are wrong with this billboard, starting with this thing that it's the first thing that meets displaced people at the railway station. But I'll just say that unfortunately, the war has given you and new strength to this idea that men should go to war and women should take children and just leave the city, leave the country in order to not be in the way, so to say. And this sentiment tied to this restrictive policy is often horrible and breeds heartbreaking situations, because quite often men who flee the war, the cities and the villages that are bombed in the east and go to Western Ukraine, they are often forced to separate with their families. And also there are much fewer programs that offer housing and help to men aged 18 to 60. And the intersection of gender and class is particularly prominent here, because if you don't have a lot of connections, if you don't have a lot of money and you cannot really rent for yourself and your family, well, you are then like, you have to rely for these different housing and different health programs that were instituted by local governments. And these programs, as I have mentioned earlier, they are very reluctant to really offer housing for displaced men. So, I mean, there were quite a few cases when men having like to flee their cities, their villages that were bombed in the east, they were basically then like sleeping in places like a railway station in a certain western town of Ukraine. And of course, these policies, they also create the new vulnerabilities, because there were quite a lot of reports about families that decided to stay under shelling and under bombing in order not to be separated, in order like not basically having like to break the family because of this. So they are basically staying and unfortunately increasing the risk to die for all the members of the family. And also, unfortunately, women, single women who decide to leave Ukraine, and also like women with children who decide to leave Ukraine and to go abroad, they often risk becoming victims of human trafficking. And there were already reports of women disappearing from Lublin, from Berlin, and from Warsaw. And again, the intersection of gender and class is really important here, because if you cannot organize your own transportation, if you don't have many connections, if you don't have money to pay for a certain kind of transportation, then you are more likely to rely on sometimes anonymous volunteers who are ready to provide you with some sort of support. And though it is great this informal like volunteering is going on, it is great that many people wholeheartedly want to help, but unfortunately there may be not some very nice people among those volunteers. And also it's important to remember that quite often people who flee Ukraine to go abroad, they don't speak language. And it's also important to remember that I don't remember the statistics right now, but the majority of Ukrainians, until the invasion started, they have never been abroad. So they really don't know how all these things work, how you get around when you leave the country. So again, these things unfortunately make you more likely to basically be prey of traffickers of different directions. And some of us with social mobility, we may take all those like rules of international travel for granted, but unfortunately for majority Ukrainians, it is much, much more complicated. However, on the bright side, just not only to talk about like the horrible side of what has happened, although there are a lot of horrible things that have happened. This war has created a lot of really unexpected alliances and solidarities, and sometimes we find cooperation, we find support in the places that we just didn't know that we can look there. And also, I think it is really important to remember that really vulnerabilities are not often found in the places that where we expect to find them. I just want to briefly mention a few cases that from my research, so to say, because I was really surprised to learn about some of them. For instance, a good friend of mine, she used to have an opioid use disorder, and she was taking medicine like methadone to treat the opioid use disorder for more than a decade. And now she's really actively helping the armed forces through a friend from her church. So it's again like it's this like link of cooperation that was not very that may be surprising to some, and that was not very, I don't know, like evident. It was not something that we would treat as readily apparent. And another good friend of mine, my participant, and she is here in this photo with the cat. She's also a former sex worker, and now she serves as a paramedic in the armed forces of Ukraine. And just a few days ago, she was bringing humanitarian aid to the devastated regions of Bucha and Irpin in the north of Kiev Oblast. And she's quite open about being a former sex worker, about having in the past also using drugs. And from what she tells, in her unit in the armed forces, people have accepted that, well, she had this part of her life, but now everybody treats her as equal. But unfortunately, because of her being like so open about her biography on social media, in various interviews that she gives journalists, she received quite a few threatening emails from people who signed off or who signed the email as Russian soldiers. And those emails had death threats to her and rape threats and all the other stuff. Like when I talk to my participants, to sex workers and to people who use drugs, some of them, they were fortunate enough that they had this connection, so they were able to leave the country, but most of them, even when they had this chance to leave the country, especially people with the opioid use disorder, they had a very, very hard time from getting on their way to getting to safety, because quite often on this way to safety, they were running out of their medications for the opioid use disorder. So like quite often, like for days and sometimes for weeks, basically they were living in this like excruciating mental and physical pain. And well, despite all of this, yet the resistance continues. And Tamara also had quite a few great images of resistance for us. And I just wanted to finish by saying that even though sex workers and people who use drugs before the war, they were quite critical of the Ukrainian state. Now, all of them, they unwaveringly support Ukraine in this war, and they look for slightest opportunity to be useful. Some of them weave masking nets for the army. Some of them fundraise and they bring humanitarian aid to people affected. So basically they help in every way they can. And there seems to be this kind of consensus among these groups that yes, Ukrainian state is not perfect, definitely, but there is still a lot of work to do, but we will do all this work like after the victory, after we win. And I guess that I will stop here, and thank you really so much for listening to this panel, and I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Daphna, for all the slides. And I remembered how Alina, during the COVID, this former sex worker activist, how she was collecting money for buying protection masks for sex workers last year, and how much hate comments she got. But yes, it's amazing work that she's doing. I wanted to use my power of being moderator to do the following. So I wanted, of course, to still give this small space for the question that we had a little bit unanswered. So what we as academics and what other people, like colleagues who are there now and those who will be watching the recording of this video, I think this is a question that I hear most often, like how can we help? What can we do? So I wanted to ask this question to all three participants, but before that, because you might need time to formulate this, I wanted to give floor for a couple of minutes to one more colleague of ours, also Ukrainian sociologist, and dear colleague of ours who is also here, Olena Strelnik, and because she might probably, complement what has already been said. Olena.
Good evening, dear friends. When Maryna invited me to this event, that time I was totally shocked by the events. That time I stayed in Ukraine and I had to make very difficult decision for everyday life related to my family and my children. But now I'm in a safe space and I think that I am able to talk, right? So, but my concerns related mostly on, let's say, epistemological issues. So my personal dilemma is how to conduct research these days. I definitely may continue my researches on how this war affected the gender order based on the open sources. But am I able personally to go in deep? When I did my research on mothering in Ukraine, it was extremely important for me to use my own experience for conducting the research. But now I am not a war survivor. I am not a mom who lost his child on their hands. I'm not a woman who was raped by Russian soldiers. I'm not a woman who evacuates people every day from war-affected zones after the great risk to die. I understand that I have a chance to be heard and present the voices of these women, at least in European Academy. But we'll be able to continue the relevant research on gender and war. How much human in women's pain I may stand. And finally, how to deal with the dilemma of doing feminist research based on respect to human dignity and empathy, and to conduct this research in a safe office in Europe, where I'm currently here, right? It seems that never before this kind of challenges of conducting feminist research was so hard and painful for me as a feminist researcher. Thank you that you gave me the floor, and probably somehow I will be able to give the answer at least on some of these questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olena. And probably with this, I will go back to Tamara. Tamara, so my question stays about what can we do, but also maybe you can all the time reflect a bit on what Olena said. I'm sure that it resonates with you as well.
Yes, thanks a lot. I think that first of all, we as scholars here abroad as refugee scholars, and we should address international academia, first of all, to make Ukrainian studies more visible. Very often Ukrainian studies are part of Russian, Eastern European, Eurasian studies or Slavic studies. And very often, of course, the major discourses for Russian studies and results are extrapolated on the whole on the whole region, and it's, I think, very colonial. And the whole idea that Ukrainians and all Ukrainians understand Russian, we were forced to do this. But anyway, I think Ukrainian language should be developed more, and Ukrainian studies as a separate discipline, as we could see, for example, at Harvard University. Also in Canada, there is particular chair in Ukrainian studies. So I really, really want that in Europe, especially, for example, in Germany, there could be this Ukrainian studies. We are very grateful to International Academia for providing scholarships for scholars at risk and for students at risk. But I think that, and not only me, all my colleagues, we believe that it's not appropriate to put Ukrainian, Russian, Belarus scholars in one scholarship and to think that we are the similar victims, because it's absolutely not. And we don't have time to explain why, but I think you could guess that for us it's absolutely uncomfortable to be in the same group, and also to know that because international universities have more contact with Russian colleagues, so they have more chances to get this scholarships, because they have problems with banks or whatever, with some other issues. And finally, I think that it's also very important to support scholars who can't come on campus, and to support scholarship like books, research on Ukraine, and to make again Ukrainian society more visible, and to understand why Ukraine still resists, as I've heard a number of times here in Germany, that people are very surprised why Ukraine is not occupied yet from these invasions of first days. So this is my major, I would say, my major message as for to international scholars. But thanks again for your solidarity. We really appreciate this.
Thank you, Tamara. Svetlana?
Yes, in addition of what I already said, I would like to say that just before in October, we have a discussion in Viadrina University in Frankfurt am Oder on methodology and language of the war, and how to do sociological research on war-torn regions. That time it was about Crimea and not controlled Donetsk and Lugansk region in Ukraine. And as being a scholar who studied these events for 2016, 17, 18, within the different international teams, cooperating with colleagues that fled from that war-torn areas, we find out that in Western academia, very often these issues are touched by Western academicians, and our voice is calculated as one of the voice of just general people who are in this situation. So our expertise is not really seen as expertise that equivalent to our Western colleagues. So, and as far as many of regional studies, as Tamara said already, is Slavic studies that comes out from Soviet studies, that comes out with focused on Russian studies. We have a lot of academics who are coming from this kind of vision of history, studied from Soviet version of history, and knowing and really have very few understanding of recent events and recent developments in Ukraine. Timothy Snyder is huge voice of Western academia on Ukrainian history and Ukrainian affairs, but we have a lot of brilliant Ukrainian scholars. And I think that given a floor, given a voice, and oriented of the history from the Soviet type of history, of vision of the Second World War, of the 20th century, of Russian history and culture from last centuries, it is also very important turn in Western academia, and also in this from Slavic, Russian, or turn to Eastern European studies. So we have to pay attention to this as well. And the other important issue here is that it is absolutely understandable that we are not on the same track, Russian, Ukrainian, and Belarus and academics from Belarus, but also we have to understand that those voices and those brave Russians who go against war in Ukraine, who are imprisoned for these reasons, who are really stand on the side of civilization, they also need support. And I think that it's again to do its generalization and ban everything. It's just not to leave a chance for them to be those who will turn the situation after the victory of Ukraine and the civilized war on this empire of evil that we have in Russia now. And also it is important that, of course, this is not a Putin's war. This is war of Russia in Ukraine and in civilization, so-called Western civilization or civilization per se, as all the culture and this history and vision of events and role of Russia in the world, it is shared in the majority of population in Russia. But important is that it also shared in diaspora, in Western countries who are these Russian-speaking groups that gathers Lithuanians, Belarusians, Swedish, those who live already here for many years, watch in Germany, a lot of such people watch Russian TV and have absolutely the same vision of events. So it's important to really differentiate those who have maybe already German, American, Canadian, Swedish passports, but still have this ideology, and those who are Russian-speaking Russian from Russia, but stay against the war, like Leah Hidjakova with her really pronounced voice against war, like different other people who are punished for this in Russia, and if they fled here, they have to have support as well. But it's of course shouldn't be the same track, like let's do a round table and have different visions and invite here Ukrainian scholars and Russian scholars. So it's absolutely unacceptable.
Thank you very much, Svetlana. Before I give the word to Daphne, I wanted to invite you also to give your questions. We already have the first question for Tamara in the chat. So please feel free either to post them or to raise your hand virtually, and then we will give you the possibility to ask. Yeah, Daphne.
Right. So I'll try to be brief because I think Tamara and Svetlana have already said a lot of important things. But when you think about Ukrainian scholars, firstly, yes, it's really important to think not only about those people who are willing and able to leave the country, but also about those people who, for some reason, decide to stay, either because, again, like they are not allowed to, or because it's basically their informed decision. And also think about, for instance, the data security question for these people. This is not something that we get to talk very often, but it may be something that Ukrainian scholars care about very deeply, so that if they are doing research in the war-affected region, if they are doing research like closer to the front line, and there is like some risk that this researcher can be captured or something can happen to their laptop or their hard drive, just be nice to have a plan B and to have like all the data stored somewhere in the Western institution so the researcher can access it after after the conflict, for instance. Secondly, I think it is really important to revise how we talk about Eastern European history, because undoubtedly Slavic studies, Eastern European studies, they have been heavily dominated by scholars of Russia for obvious reasons, because Russia claims to be the main inheritor of the Soviet Union, and because of the Cold War and all these things, that like Russia is still like this big other for the Western world. I really understand that, but we are quite okay. We are quite accustomed to talking about different post-colonial histories, to histories that are written not from the point of view of the superior power, so to say, but somehow when it comes to Eastern Ukraine, to Eastern Europe and to Ukraine in particular, we are not as somehow like as easygoing with histories like written from the point of view of the underdog, so to say. And I think that it is prime time when we think about how basically we can interpret, how we can think about Eastern European history if it is not the history written from the point of view of Russia. What if this is history written from the perspective of Moldova or from the Ukrainian perspective, for instance? And thirdly, but not least importantly, I think that just echoing what Svetlana has mentioned, it is really important, I think, to treat Ukrainian scholars, to treat Eastern European scholars in general as colleagues, but not as people on the ground who have data. Because I think this conflict has amplified these inequalities in the process of knowledge production, and quite often Ukrainian scholars and not only Ukrainian scholars, I think also sometimes scholars from Belarus, we are reduced to this, oh yeah, we have a lot of stuff on the ground, we know what is going on, so other people, they can just go to us for data, but yeah, you know, just like leave this theorizing to other people. Well, we can disentangle the ethics of that for many hours and days to come. Let's not do this right now. Let's just probably agree for now that is not probably like the most ethical and also the most helpful and the most solidarity inspiring thing to do these days.
Thank you very much, Daphna, for these very valid points. And we have already 2 questions in the chat, and I probably will read them together because they come together very well. And the first is for Tamara, but then I would also ask all speakers, whoever wants to reply and to pick them up. So the first question goes about the role of women in the Ukrainian army. So what are the obstacles that women in the Ukrainian army have overcome after the Euromaidan protests in 2013, 2014? And what are the challenges that remain? And is it possible, for example, for women in the Ukrainian army to climb the ladder and take the highest ranks? And then the next question is about this, the paradox, so to say, that on the one hand, war strengthens patriarchal stereotypes, but at the same time, we see this empowerment, emancipation of women, military resistance, and all the other examples that we're giving. So what are your reflections on that? How this will influence gender roles in our society, and what are the implications? And there will be more questions then, but let's start with these ones, Tamara.
Okay. First of all, I would like to thank Catherine, as a journalist who writes about Ukrainian military women, for your work. And as for obstacles that Ukrainian armed forces overcome, first of all, when we talk about armed forces and military as labor market, so it's actually it overcame discrimination as for access to combat positions, because as a result, we did study in 15 next years, military women were protesting and lobbying changes in this very paternalistic legislation. And legislation was paternalistic in a civilian life because was a list of forbidden professions for women, as also like late Soviet time legacy. And this list was very changed, only few professions in mines left. And so women, military women got around 100 military combat positions, and those who were who volunteered in anti-terrorist operation as snipers, drivers of military equipment and others, they got recognition and they became official veterans. And also, so in this situation, also it's more visibility and more gender sensitivity in women in armed forces as for military clothes, equipment, whatever. So it changed. Also, what is very important issue, access to military education, because of this, with lack of this access, you can't work in military. And formally now it is full access. Very important that in a very prestigious military college named by Ivan Bogun, girls actually got right to enter this college, and now we have already first graduates. Another issue is visibility of female veterans. They constitute 10% of all veterans, and in general, in Ukrainian armed forces, women are more than 10%. But of course, you are right, absolutely, in your question about if they can climb more senior ranks in the military. There is so-called glass ceiling. And only recently, 1 year ago, I will put link that actually the first woman became general, brigadier general Tatiana Ostashchenko. It happened actually 1 year ago, but it happened. Like women, they started to be in a very top position, but it's still a problem. And there is lack of women on decision making when military decides on very strategic issues, and it's very visible. Another issue, lack of stereotypes, especially in media, because very often for media, women perceived as beautiful armed forces, and it's not only media, but media shares the stereotypes. So I do believe that it changes from time to time, and now in this war, we could see that women are much more visible, even in the situation of naming, how top politicians address military and address population. So in the language, and Ukrainian is Slavic, it's gender sensitive. So they refer also to women as a group. Another challenge, it's taboo on talking about gender-based violence and sexual harassment in military. In Ukraine, we had our own Me Too campaign, even before Me Too. It was in 2016, and I do believe that it's a result also of Euromaidan. It was called I'm Not Afraid to Say It, and very problematic issues of sexual violence, sexual harassment in the universities and in the military, they were addressed. It became possible for women and also for men to talk on sexual harassment in armed forces, and even to have 2 court cases. For Ukraine, it's really a huge already success, because Ukraine is not a country where courts are trusted and people don't go to court, especially with such problematic issues. So now it's detabooization of this sexual harassment topic in military, but still there are some changes, there are some challenges like, as I said, glass ceiling, is still some stereotypes, gender-based violence, but I personally see huge changes compared to Euromaidan and beginning of war in Donbass. And to answer, just to jump to another topic about patriarchal stereotypes and egalitarian, you know, it's actually, it's always an issue, of course, what and how you see, and it's an issue of discussion if feminism and nationalism could intersect or not. Because in the situation in Western scholarship, of course, like nationalism, fight for the independence of nation is heavily criticized through feminist perspectives, that it's women are used by, you know, in this national fights, whatever. But in the situation of Ukraine, where Ukraine for last 300 years was constantly fighting for its independence, and women were doing, of course, so different roles. They've been both mothers and also both fighters in all these underground movements. And it's, I think, more theorizing and scholarship should be developed by non-Western scholars from those countries that were not colonized, but vice versa, who are on other power positions. But I think that compared to 10 years ago with Euromaidan, now we see less patriarchal stereotypes, less sexism, like wild sexism as it was before. So I'm a bit more positive in this situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamara. Yep.
Sorry, if I just may add very briefly to this question about stereotypes and changes. I think that it's important to remember that progress is not linear, and there is some continuity to institutions, and institutions are often slow to change, which doesn't really mean that they are not changing if we cannot observe like something that is like readily something ongoing. And just like one small thing that has changed and that is like quite observable is how the president of Ukraine, how Zelensky, in his addresses to the nation, how he refers to the armed forces. He often says захисники і захисниці, so essentially he uses like both genders when he refers to the armed forces. And I think that it is like a, sorry, I have a puppy here. It is a small, but nevertheless an important thing that it's important to notice. And I will go and calm the puppy now. I'm so sorry.
So there are, so first there is a still question if somebody wants to add on the combination between gender stereotypes, patriarchal attitudes at war and emancipation, but also two more questions in the chat, and then maybe like whoever of three speakers wants to answer, or maybe Olena. One, and I want to bring it up, is about the Russian journalist Maryna Shevtsova, but I think it's not the individual case of hers, but also like of some perspective that Western media gives on Russian resistances. So we had a small accident here at Ljubljana University where we had a discussion with one of my colleagues here about whether it is appropriate to put Maryna Shevtsova's case next to Ukrainian flag covered with blood and mention her as one of the heroes of resistance, talking about the war in Ukraine. And my message then was that while we should appreciate, of course, actions of some Russians, still for us and for many Ukrainians, especially Ukrainian refugees, it is very insulting and sometimes painful when you know, not the experiences of Ukrainians are there, but of some people who actually contributed directly to creation of propagandistic material and who has been working for years at First Russian National Channel, creating those news. but it's not only her case, right? So there are also some other situations in which some experiences of Russian people suffering, and I'm not mentioning those who go out in the protests and those who has been going so for years, but those who suffer from sanctions, such as, you know, being unable to use master or visa cards, or losing some scholarships, when those are, you know, put in front of things that are happening in Ukraine. So I wanted to hear your opinion on that. And of course, there is also a question about women's NGOs and organizations in Ukraine. So, you know, whatever question is more comfortable for three of you, please feel free to jump in. And then do we have more? And then we have more questions. And let's do with this first. So who would like to?
I can start maybe, and then someone can chime in. And I'll start with the Maryna Shevtsova question. And I'll just say that, okay, let's start with the practical side. And I think that it's really good that it happened. It's really good that she did what she did, because she is a person who has been working in this propaganda apparatus of Russia for many, many years. But turns out there was some line even for her. So on the practical side, that is really good that it happened. However, I think that when we start talking about her as hero and basically equating her with many other people, including like people who are defending Ukraine, for instance, with their with arms and things like that, I am not sure that it should be done, and that it makes me, for instance, quite comfortable, because I think that what she did, it was her civic duty. She saw what was happening and she spoke against that. It is great. However, there is also this perspective of like, we as social scientists, right? We constantly ask this question of like, okay, so why we know something about this person, but not about this person? So there is certain politics to the names that are being thrown around, to the names that are being attached the title of hero, and to the names that are being like remembered then on. And I think that it is a little bit unfair, and it is a little bit unjust to a lot of Ukrainians to basically equate the name of this person with the names of many people who were forced by another country, by the aggressor, to basically put their lives on the line. And we will not ever remember many names of these people who died protecting their land from the country of aggressor. So in a nutshell, that is how I treat this issue.
Yeah, I just add 2 words to this example, just how many names of Russian people who go with their protest, that who was beaten and prosecuted and imprisoned, we know. No, we have absolutely almost zero knowledge about people who really protested. But again, as a social scientists and sociologists who know this, how media works, and that Russian propaganda channels now work, they don't have just broadcasting without previous recording. And it just question, was it a real event or was it a produced event to have this wave of reaction? And then I think we have to weight these things and to give more attention for real people who are not getting the voice over there, and absolutely more important are people who really fight now in Ukraine. Real actions means much more than bright pictures that we could get via media. And attention to this is very important, and understanding of that picture is differs to real actions and events. And we have a lot of this online propaganda issues, memes that are found out as not true. We have a lot of this stop fake news scenes. So as to this Shevtsenikova case, I am really on the side of this Maryna's idea that it's absolutely relevant to make a hero from this event. And as to the other question on how gender roles and stereotypes change after the war, I think that we have already a huge change, and it becomes much more visible, that huge role and all this invisible battalion that was started as invisible, but now even in president's speech we have this appreciation of women defenders, and also we have a lot of change. I was really surprised with the question here in Lund about how much difference do we have in Ukraine comparatively to Turkey on gender roles and how they are changing now. So again, we have a very had to have quite a secular society with a very high level of gender equality if we compare it to traditional societies. We are a modern society with modern transformation pattern of gender roles, and we have really different, not homogeneous process of gender roles transformation. So we are far from women priests in the church like it is in Sweden, but we are also very far from women who are just housekeepers and child cares. But even when we have this image in European countries that Ukrainian women are working in care work in families, it doesn't mean that we have only this kind of things, and it was just because of really those women could have higher education and be a professional, but the salary in Ukraine in these high professional jobs like teaching in school or physics or math is so much lower than to be a nurse, not nurse, but babysitting or elderly care givers in Italy or Germany. Even then, these women are breadwinners for their families, and this is a different role and different family gender role that is very complex. So from the one hand, it's typical women thing, but for her family in Ukraine, she is a breadwinner. And this changed her relationships with her family and so on and so forth. And we have a good research on this done for my colleagues Rovinchak and Volodina, studying this in women labor migration to Poland and Greece and Italy. And I think that now we have a very fast transformation under the war condition. And it also depends on us how we'll continue and implement these changes in our legislation when we will be rebuilding our country after the victory. So I really think that we did a lot attempts to ratify Istanbul Convention, and didn't yet succeed, but we had several petitions already and a big team support in our Verkhovna Rada parliament. And I think that it's again a big piece of work to be done, but we are really quite on the way and very much comparable in gender roles in European countries, much more to Asian countries of former Soviet Union, and when we are gathered in the same bunch in reports, we can see that we are really very much different. We are not talking about girls' illiteracy or inequality of girls in education, in getting maths or other kind of education, like it is an issue for Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and so on. So I would like to say that we have to use this as a turn to more attention to Ukraine as a European country, which is not going to become European, but it is already, and in very many respects, especially in terms of gender issues. Thank you.
I wanted to bring the attention of the participants that there is some information in the chat that our speaker provided about women's NGOs, and also the some links to the organizations that you can support if you choose to. And I also wanted to add to Milica's question about NGOs, women's rights NGOs, but also other human rights NGOs that are now in Ukraine, that of course, all of them, those who stay there and also those who evacuated but continue working abroad, now switched to humanitarian aid as much as possible. And the biggest problem, apart from what Daphne wrote, that being unable to reach people on occupied territories, is of course that not all of them are able to use their funds that they have from their donors to humanitarian aid. So some donors showed flexibility and they allow to rechannel the money for buying basic things like food, paying for rent for the shelter and so on. But some donors actually said no and just froze the projects. So of course the thing to help and what we are asking also everywhere is if you want to donate, maybe reconsider donating to some big organizations like UNICEF or Red Cross, but instead look up these smaller organizations that are in Ukraine who really, really need cash now. And they need this cash to buy food, to buy hygienic products, to buy gasoline, because that's very expensive. And this would be really, really helpful. And now we are running out of time, I know, but if there is a last question or the speakers want to say something, I would be.
Just wanted to second your point about not donating to big organizations, because there is a lot of information about important products, important medicine, just being crammed into some big logistical hubs in Western Ukraine, but basically like not reaching the people who really need it. So do donate to the smaller initiatives, because these people quite often they may not have these big scale operations, and unfortunately the realities are very harsh and we will not be able to help everyone. I know that you will hate me for saying this, but unfortunately this is the reality. But when you are donating to the particular small scale initiative, it's 100% sure that every dollar, every euro you donate will go to the people who need it, and that this money will be used to buy stuff that these people like actually need. And I mean, like big organizations, they have also been notorious for having a lot of contractors. So like not every cent on the dollar donated actually reaches the people in need. So yeah.
If we have no more questions, on my side, I wanted to say thank you to all the speakers and to everyone who joined us today, and especially again the speakers that you found time and energy and force to be with us. And thank you the Faculty of Arts for giving us this opportunity. And with this, I will give the floor again to Milica.
Thank you so much, Maryna, and thank you all the speakers, Tamara, Olena, Svetlana, and Daphne, to have some time, to spend some time with us, to prepare your presentations. I cannot say that I enjoyed, but I liked your presentation. I think that there were really some serious and really hard work behind all this. thank you again, and I hope we'll stay in touch and maybe make some more out of this first discussion. Thank all the participants. Thank you, Maryna, for helping me organizing this event. And thank you all who spent these 2 hours with us. I hope, and I think that we are all more informed now, and we can speak to the others to spread this information around. Thank you.